Thank you so much for coming here. We were waiting for you. Thank you for having us. I'm Ed, and this is my wife Lorraine. Lorraine looked around the property. The moment our car reached near this house, I saw her behavior changed. I could tell from her worried eyes she was feeling something. I'm familiar with this expression on her face. Mr. Donovan was leading us the way. The big two-storied and wooden house stood like a lone wolf in the middle of nowhere. Dry leaves were all over the ground.
Please, come in.
A woman came and held Lorraine's hand. I could see the fear on her face.
I can't thank you enough for coming here. Please help us.
Lorraine comforted her, saying,
Mrs. Donovan, that's why we're here. You must calm down and tell me everything. Yes, come, let's sit.
Lorraine and I walked to the living room. The house was really cold. There was a chilling sensation in the air of the house, as if the temperature dropped all of a sudden. We sat down on the couch. Mrs. Donovan sat next to Lorraine, and Mr. Donovan grabbed a chair and sat near the fireplace. I keep turning the heater on, but still, the house temperature remains cold. Lorraine and I exchanged looks, because we knew the reason behind it. Mr. Donovan lit up the fireplace. A maid came and served us hot coffee. I took a sip from the coffee cup and said,
How long have you lived here? It's been a few years now, but the incidents have been happening for the past few months. Everything was going well, we were happy here, but all of a sudden our life turned into nightmares.
Mrs. Donovan was trying hard to stop her tears.
Can you please tell us how it all started?
Lorraine said. Mrs. Donovan looked at the fireplace. She kept quiet for some time and watched the flames.
It was around 3 a.m. in the morning. Heavy rain and thunderstorms were going on outside. Our daughter Patty was sleeping upstairs, and our son Brian's room was right next to hers. I woke up hearing a whispering sound. I searched the living room and the hallway downstairs. At first, I thought maybe Brian was watching TV secretly, but I found the entire downstairs dark and empty. I was going back to my room thinking it was my imagination when I heard footsteps going upstairs. I ran to see who it was, but there was no one. It was just me, standing alone near the stairs amidst the thunder and lightning. I went upstairs to check on my kids. I found Brian in deep sleep in his room. I was about to go inside Patty's room when I heard whispers coming from her. I opened her door and saw she was sitting on her bed. I asked her who she was talking to. She just told me no one, that she woke up to the sound of lightning. I noticed the windows of her room were shut and locked. Just to be sure, I searched her room. I mean, she is young, and I didn't want any boy to sneak into her room in the middle of the night. But there was no one, so I came back to bed. After that night, bizarre things started to happen in this house.
What kind of bizarre things? I asked.
One day I woke up and went to the washroom to clean my face. I turned on the tap and splashed water on my face, and as soon as I lifted my head and looked in the mirror, I saw...
What did you see, Mrs. Donovan?
My face and hands were covered with blood. Blood was coming out of the tap instead of water. The entire sink was red and splattered with blood.
Mrs. Donovan hid her face into her palms, remembering the fearful memory. Mr. Donovan replied, We don't know what's happening here. Last week, our car tires started to burst out on their own. No matter how many times I changed them, every morning Patty would find a flat tire. Our kids are terrified, and so are we. You see those pictures on the table? Mr. Donovan pointed out to the corner of the room. I saw a framed family photo that was kept on the table. Every time we hung those pictures, some invisible force knocks them down. Not just that, our wallpapers come off from the walls for no reason. It seems like someone peels them off vigorously. Furniture moves on its own, and now we are even terrified of our daughter.
What's wrong with your daughter?
Lorraine asked. Mrs. Donovan started sobbing in a low voice. Mr. Donovan looked at her and said in a low voice, She's changed. Something got into her. Last night we were having dinner. All four of us were sitting at the dining table. Patty was sitting beside me. when she suddenly looked up at the ceiling and froze. She was staring at the blank ceiling for no reason. I asked her what it was, but she didn't say anything. She then looked at me and smiled in a very disturbing way. "What are you smiling at, Patty?" I asked her. What she said still gives me goosebumps. "Why? What did she tell you?" I spoke. Mr. and Mrs. Donovan exchanged a fearful look. She looked right into my eyes and said, "You all smell different when you're awake." For the first time, the silence in the room made my heart skip a beat. Lorraine looked at me and said, "I can feel an evil presence in this house, Ed. We need to talk with your daughter. Where is your son?" "I sent him to stay with my brother for a while. Patty's behavior scared him badly, and we wanted to keep him out of this house." "Okay, let's go meet Patty then." We all got up and started to walk upstairs. It's time to meet Patty, for whom we came here for. A humming sound was coming from her room. Mr. Donovan pushed the door, and we saw a young teenage girl lying on a bed and humming mysteriously. Lorraine said in a low voice,
"Patty, how are you?"
She got up on her bed and stared at us with her big blank eyes. Lorraine sat close to her and said,
"Patty, what was that song you were humming?" "My boyfriend taught me." "Your boyfriend? Is he in your school?" "Nope. He stays with me in this house." "Really? How did he get inside?" "I called him with a Ouija board. He told me I'm the most beautiful girl in the world."
We were all shocked to hear this from Patty. Lorraine looked at me with scared eyes. I knew what she was trying to tell me. I got close to Patty and said,
"Did he tell you his name, Patty?" "No. I keep asking him, but he never says."
"What else has he told you?" Patty was going to say something when suddenly she looked at the door behind me and froze. "What is it, Patty? Is someone standing there?" I asked.
"He doesn't want you here."
"Can you ask him what he does want?"
"He doesn't want you here. He wants you out of this house. He's saying he wants you all dead."
Before we could say anything more, Patty started to scream violently and scratch her face with her nails. It was a horrifying scene to watch a young, healthy girl tearing her skin like this. "Oh my God, Patty, stop!" Mr. Donovan and I held Patty down in the bed while she kicked and screamed like an animal. Mrs. Donovan burst into tears, screaming in pain. Lorraine took her out of the room immediately. We had no other way than tying Patty's hands to the bed to stop her from hurting herself. Within 5 minutes, Patty calmed down and fell asleep, as if nothing happened. We came out of her room and sat down in the living room. No one talked for a few moments, and then Lorraine spoke.
"Your daughter must have felt lonely and used that Ouija board out of curiosity. In that process, she invited an evil entity into your house. Now, this demon has latched itself onto her, and all that has been happening to you in his deeds. We must stop this demon before it takes Patty's soul away. Ed, it's time to call Father Jason. We must perform the exorcism today."
Father Jason arrived right after sunset. We all walked upstairs. As soon as we entered Patty's room, we saw a horrifying scene. Patty had somehow freed herself and was standing near the window.
"Patty? Patty, are you all right?"
Father Jason said in a soft voice. She didn't turn back, but her upper body started to bend towards her feet. She looked right at us with blood-red eyes. Mrs. Donovan screamed and ran downstairs in fear. Patty laughed in a demonic voice. That night, Father Jason and I fought the devil with all our power. Patty was extremely violent. We tied her to the bed, but she kept cursing us. I could tell the demon possessed her completely and was reluctant to leave. We chanted our prayers. Pieces of furniture were levitating in the air. A chair came right at me, as if someone threw it to harm me. But we didn't stop. The windows were slamming hard. A gush of wind ravaged the entire room, and the demon and Patty laughed, screamed, but we didn't stop. We had to save this girl. The exorcism went on the whole night. Right after dawn, we saw Patty's body being lifted in the air. It was all happening on its own. Father Jason said his last prayer and sprinkled the holy water on her. As soon as he did that, Patty's mouth was wide open, and black smoke came out and drifted away out of the window. Everything fell silent. Lorraine rushed upstairs and said,
Ed, it's over now. We've done it. I can feel it.
I believe in Lorraine's ability. I knew she was right. Before starting the story, I would suggest you guys to go subscribe to the channel. It turns out that most of you guys who watch me aren't actually subscribed. So, if you like the content and want to support the channel, go ahead and subscribe and hit the bell. It's free, and you can always change your mind later. Every anniversary, Lorraine and I take a trip to southern England to visit one of our favorite haunted locations, the Borley Church. This place is utterly haunted, and a demonic spirit from the castle latched itself to Lorraine to some extent. After visiting this church for the first time, Lorraine had sightings of a nun, even in our own house. But before I jump into the entire experience of visiting this place for the first time, let me tell you a brief story about the history of this place. Borley Church is the parish church in Borley, Essex. The history of the church can be dated to the 11th century. Since that time, the story of the Borley nun has become infamous. The story goes like this. There was a nun who fell in love with a monk from a nearby monastery. Soon, their affair got discovered by the other members of the church. As a punishment for their sin, the monk was executed. His head was cut off. On the other side, the nun was buried alive inside the church walls. Her remains were later removed and buried in nearby Liston churchyard. Since then, the nun haunts this place. When we came to know about the story, we decided to travel to this place to know if this place is actually haunted or not. I must tell you, we weren't disappointed. It was a long drive, almost about 4 to 5 hours. We rented a small cabin for our stay during the trip. At around 4 o'clock, we reached our destination. We kept the luggage in our room and headed for the church. The church building stood like a lonely person with its old attire. I went inside, but suddenly realized Lorraine was not beside me. I turned back and saw that she was standing near the church door. Her eyes were fixated on the wall nearby.
Are you getting something, hon?
I asked. She looked at me with a sad face and said,
She couldn't breathe after a while. This thick wall choked her to death.
I noticed the wall carefully. There wasn't anything unnatural in its appearance, though. It was just a wall with yellow, rusty bricks.
Let's go,
Lorraine said, and started to walk inside. We met the father of the church. He was lighting up the candles. He talked to us for some time. We told him about the story of the Borley nun to see his reaction. He confirmed that at night, mischievous things do happen here. The church turns into a completely different place after sunset. It was almost and started to get dark outside. We took permission from him to spend a night here. He wasn't very willing, but somehow we managed him. After finishing his last prayer for that day, he headed home. Before leaving us, he warned us that if we see or feel anything unnatural, we must leave this church immediately. I started to set up our cameras, while Lorraine went to take a round of the premise. After being done with the equipment, I looked at my watch. It was 7:30. The valley was dark and there was pin-drop silence everywhere. Just when I was going out to look for Lorraine, I heard her spine-chilling scream. I rushed towards the door and came out into the churchyard. At some distance, I saw Lorraine standing in the dark. I ran to her.
What happened? Why are you screaming? Look there.
Lorraine pointed out in the empty yard nearby. At first, I couldn't see anything but fog and darkness. There was a street lamp right at the end of the yard. It was giving very low light. I noticed the bush near the lamp was moving mysteriously, but I still couldn't see anything.
Nothing's out there. What did you see? No, look. Can't you see him standing there?
I turned back towards the bush again, and this time, my skin crawled in fear. What I saw made my spine shiver. A man was standing behind that bush. He was dressed in a black robe, exactly like a Christian monk. The hood on his head made it impossible to see his face. The man was still as a statue. I could tell from his body posture that he was staring at us. I initially thought someone was trying to scare us, because there have been many hoaxes and pranks people tried to pull on blaming the supernatural. Hey, what do you think you're doing? Don't try and scare us. I took a few steps ahead to warn that man, but Lorraine screamed from behind, saying, "No, Ed, he's not human." As soon as she said that, I froze right then and there. The man then walked towards the street lamp and stood under it. He then lifted his hands and grabbed his hood. What I saw next, I will never forget. The man took off his hood, and he had no head. Yes, he was headless. I could see red flesh and white bones gushing out from his slashed neck. It was the headless monk. I turned back and grabbed Lorraine's hand. We both started to run towards the church. The wind outside was cold, and it was blowing like a mad dog all of a sudden. Somehow, we ran inside the church and locked the door, slamming it hard. Both of us were panting in fear. I was going to ask Lorraine if she was feeling all right or not, when I noticed her face turning pale. Lorraine? Oh my God, we've stepped right into their trap, Ed! What? What are you talking about? What traps? Remember, the church father told us if we see anything disturbing, we must get out of this church. I immediately grabbed the doorknob and tried to open it. I was giving it all my strength, but the doorknob was jammed. It wasn't opening, and I realized the haunting spirits here have now locked us inside. Suddenly, the temperature dropped rapidly inside the church. It was becoming icy cold. My camera started to take random snaps. I knew Lorraine and I were not the only ones here anymore. The church bell rang 3 times. I knew no one stays here at night. Then who the hell is ringing the bell? Suddenly, my eyes went on the wall nearby. It was the same wall that Lorraine pointed out in the beginning. A figure slowly took place on the wall. It was a shadow of a nun. Before I could see the shadow more clearly, the candles inside the church went out. It got pitch dark and we heard a woman crying in pain. There was something in her cry that gave me goosebumps. Lorraine grabbed my hand and we stood side by side in that darkness, expecting all of this to get over. All of a sudden, the church door opened and the fog outside came in and covered the entire floor. It felt like we were having our worst nightmare together. The light from the outside helped us to spot the doorway quite clearly. At that moment, Lorraine whispered to my ears, "There she comes." I looked and I saw a nun was standing near the door facing her back at us. She was holding an upside-down cross in her left hand. Her black dress was as dark as the night. All the candles lit back again on their own, and with this sudden strike of light, she turned her face at us. I have never seen such a demonic face in my entire life. Her cruel eyes were filled with furious anger. Blood was dripping from her mouth, and she was staring at us with immense hatred. It felt like she wants every living being on this earth to die at once. She then smiled, looking right into my eyes. Her smile was spread from ear to ear, and then she disappeared into thin air. Lorraine and I left for home the very next morning, but on the ride, when I asked Lorraine if the nun's spirit tried to communicate with her, she replied, "This is just the beginning, Ed." When she looked at us and smiled, I heard her saying, "I will see you again." This happened the night Lorraine and I were returning to Connecticut after investigating the Amityville house in Long Island. It was a 2-hour drive on the highway. We started late, hence it got really dark. Lorraine fell asleep during the ride. It was a foggy winter night. With nights like these, driving amidst the dark road is one hell of a task. The fog and darkness around us were making it difficult to increase the speed of the car. After driving for almost an hour, we got out on a dusty country road. I did take a shortcut at the beginning of the ride, but by this time we should have gotten on the freeway. I checked the map and realized we were lost. The car headlights were the only option to see what lies ahead. There was no street lights on the road. I was thinking of waking Lorraine up and discussing our situation with her, when suddenly I noticed a signboard on my left. The signboard read, "Welcome to Easton, Connecticut." I felt relieved that we are still moving towards the destination. I checked the map again and noticed a path within a mile connecting to the highway. I decided to take that from the next right. I was probably 20 minutes away from the shortcut when suddenly the car started to malfunction. A small jerking took place, and the car stopped in the middle of nowhere. I twisted the car key, but the car didn't start. I tried to start it again, but nothing happened. I was about to get out of the car when Lorraine grabbed my hand. I got a bit startled because I didn't realize she woke up.
What is it, Lorraine?
She was looking outside with wide eyes. I noticed a tense look on her face. Her hand was trembling in fear. I immediately understood that she was having a premonition.
Is something out there, hon?
Lorraine's eyes kept searching here and there. The fog outside started to cover up our car in no time. Lorraine raised her hand and pointed her finger ahead. The ambiance around us got so quiet that I could almost hear Lorraine's heavy breathing. I looked in front of the car, but there was nothing I could see. But I kept staring without blinking once. Oh my God, what the hell was that?
Something bad happened here, Ed.
I should check it out then.
No, now is not the time. We'll have to come back later. We must leave now.
Lorraine didn't let me get out of the car. I told her that I have to get out to see what's wrong with the engine. But Lorraine said in a low voice,
"Twist the key. It'll start now."
I did as she said and the car started, shocking the hell out of me. None of us said a single word in the rest of the ride. When we got home, Lorraine went straight to bed without mentioning a single word about what happened tonight. Next morning, when I found Lorraine sitting in the living room sipping coffee, I sat right next to her and said,
"You all right, hon?" "Yes, I feel better now, Ed. I need to tell you something about last night, though. I know you have so many questions already. I hope what I'm about to say will answer some of them."
I nodded my head and replied,
"Go on." "Last night when our car stopped in front of that graveyard, I was almost awake with the sound of the car engine not starting. But before I could open my eyes and talk to you, I heard a woman's voice whispering into my ear. She said, 'I want my son back.' That's when I stopped you from getting out of the car. I think we need to go there and investigate. There's an entity that wants to tell her story."
I looked at Lorraine for some time. This may seem odd to you all, but I believed her, because I have seen things happen that she warned me about in advance. We finished lunch and started on the road again. We have recently moved here, hence we knew nothing about this cemetery until last night. At around 2 p.m., we reached near the cemetery. The place looked just as normal as any other burial site in the daylight. We started to walk inside. The worn-out graves stood in silence. Judging by the condition of the tombstones, it was evident that this graveyard had been here for a very long time. We roamed around for a while when I noticed a small wooden cabin under the shade of a bushy tree. Lorraine started to walk towards the cabin. I followed her without saying anything. When we reached the door, we heard the sound of a radio inside the cabin. I knocked on the door. "Hello? Is there anyone here?" Making a creaking sound, the door opened slightly. An old man with a rough beard peeked from the gap. "Who are you? What do you want?" Sir, I'm Ed Warren. This is my wife, Lorraine. We live in the neighborhood nearby. We would like to talk to you about this graveyard." The man checked me out from top to bottom, then said in the same mysterious voice, "What is there to talk about a graveyard? I don't have time for this. Go back to where you came from." The man was closing the door on our face when I stopped him and said in a firm voice, "I'll pay you if you give me the information we need about this place." The man eyed me and let us both in. It was a really dirty cabin with a weird smell. Lorraine and I didn't sit. The man sat on a chair nearby and said, "Ask." Lorraine said in a hesitated voice,
"How long have you been working here?"
"Long before you came into this world." I was really not enjoying his attitude, so I intervened, saying,
"Have you seen anything at night?"
The man's face suddenly turned pale. He said in a low voice, "Why are you asking me this?" I had to tell him about last night to give him a clear idea about why we were here. He listened to me quietly and then said, "It was Harriet. People call her the White Lady of Easton. You aren't the first one who saw her. Many people who passed in front of this cemetery claim to have seen her. One evening, a man was driving down the road in his pickup truck. He was about to pass the Union Cemetery when, out of nowhere, a woman appeared in the middle of the road wearing a white dress. The man couldn't slow down in time and struck the woman. He pulled over and came out panicking. He thought he ran her over. Out of fear and guilt, he searched the entire area, but the woman was nowhere to be seen. She searches for her son. You can see her grave in the right corner at the end of the cemetery. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have to finish my round and leave for home," I said in a surprised voice. "Wait, you don't stay here at night?" "Only a madman would come here at night. Now, get lost, you two. I don't need your money." The man was very rude, but we got what we needed. After visiting Harriet's grave, we talked to the local sheriff and came to know Harriet B. Seeley had a son who died before her in 1853. Since then, she grieves here at night, searching for her dead son. We went home to bring our cameras. Yes, Lorraine and I planned to spend a night in this cemetery. At around 9:30, we came back. Needless to say, the entire place was looking spooky as hell. I set up a camera right in front of Harriet's grave. Then, we waited for things to happen. We were standing under a tree some distance from the grave. Our senses were sharp. I was ready to act if something happened, but even after waiting for half an hour, we didn't see anything. I was getting impatient, but Lorraine was focused. Her eyes were searching everywhere. I was about to make a move when suddenly, Lorraine said, "Do you hear that?" "Hear what?" I whispered. "Listen carefully. Someone's crying." I kept quiet and listened. After a few seconds, I too heard the sobbing sound. It was a female voice. A woman was crying in pain. On that cold winter night, drops of sweat appeared on my forehead because the sound started to come closer. It was as if the woman was crying and walking. With each second, her weeping voice was coming closer and closer. We didn't make a move and stood in the dark staring at the foggy graveyard in front of our eyes. What I saw next still gives me goosebumps. A white figure started to rise from the grave. It was a woman wearing a white gown, but the way she moved seemed like she was floating in the air. She was weeping in terrible pain. Her cry echoed in the empty graveyard. Her long, dark hair was floating in the air as she moved from one side to the other, grieving for her dead son. "Ed, she's in pain. I can feel her pain. Oh, God." Lorraine collapsed on the ground. I knew the negative energy around us was taking a toll on her. I lifted her and decided to head back to our car. As I looked up, the woman was nowhere. I made Lorraine sit in the car and went back to get my camera. I tried to be as quick as possible. I was almost near Harriet's grave when a spine-chilling scream took place, and I saw hundreds of white lights levitating in the air. It was her, the White Lady of Easton. She appeared in front of me and screamed in pain one last time. I heard her sobbing voice. "I want my son! I want my son!" The white figure then faded away in the air. We came home and Lorraine suffered terrible weakness for 3 days. I still have the footage my camera took that night. Luckily, we did capture the ghost of the White Lady. Lorraine keeps it lock and key, as it is a valuable evidence that proves ghosts and demons do exist among us.